She smiled at strangers even when she had nothing. A billionaire finally asked why, and her answer stopped him cold. One tired child. One quiet question. A legal line he must cross. What begins as kindness becomes a fight to protect a smile that never should have carried the world alone. The city moved fast that evening, heels clicking engines, humming breath, turning white in the cold. Mason Rourke stepped out of the glass tower, his coat buttoned tight, his thoughts still tangled in meetings that never truly ended. He almost didn't see her. A small figure stood near the bus stop, framed by the glow of a streetlight. An old backpack rested at her feet, placed neatly against the bench. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't calling out. She was just there. And she was smiling. Not the kind of smile meant to sell something. Not the kind meant to beg. It was gentle, quiet, offered freely to the strangers rushing past her. One man glanced at her and frowned, confused. A woman slowed for half a second, then hurried on. The smile remained steady as the light above her. Mason stopped walking. For a moment, the noise of the city faded. All he could see was that smile reflected faintly in the cold glass of the building, behind her, small, warm, stubbornly alive. She noticed him looking, and without hesitation smiled at him too. It caught him off guard. Not because it was bright, but because it asked for nothing in return. Mason felt something tighten in his chest. He told himself it was nothing. Just a child waiting for a ride. Just another moment in a long day. He took one step forward, then stopped. He had learned over years of success how to walk past things that slowed him down. Still, when he turned away, he felt the strange certainty that something important had just tried to introduce itself, and he had almost missed it. Behind him, the girl kept smiling, offering quiet warmth to a city that barely noticed. Mason crossed the street and pushed open the door to a small cafe on the corner. Warm air rushed out to meet him, carrying the smell of coffee and baked bread. He ordered out of habit, then took a seat by the window. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, tired, controlled, carefully distant. Outside, the bus stop was still there. So was the girl. She hadn't moved much. Her backpack remained neatly in place, her posture small but composed. When a security guard passed, she smiled at him. He hesitated, nodded politely, and continued on. Rena, the cafe manager, noticed Mason's gaze. "You see her too, huh?" she said quietly, setting his cup down. Mason didn't answer at first. "She's always here." Rena nodded. "Doesn't bother anyone. Doesn't ask for anything. Just sits. Always polite." Mason watched as the girl adjusted the strap of her backpack, smoothing it like it mattered. "She doesn't look lost," Mason said. "No," Rena replied. "Just alone." The word landed heavier than it should have. Mason took a sip of his coffee. It tasted bitter. He told himself not to read into things, not to imagine stories where none were needed. There were systems for this, programs, procedures, and yet there she was, quiet, smiling, existing in the space between being noticed and being ignored. He paid and stood to leave. Outside, the cold pressed in again. As Mason passed the bus stop, the girl looked up. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She just smiled. This time, Mason slowed. Not enough to stop, but enough to feel the weight of choosing not to. The third time Mason saw her, the sky had already darkened. The streetlights flickered on one by one like hesitant stars. He stopped. The girl looked up, surprised, but not afraid. Her smile came easily, as if it had been waiting. "Hi," Mason said, careful to keep his voice low, calm. "It's cold out here." She nodded. "Yes, sir." There was no complaint in her tone, just acknowledgement. Mason hesitated. He'd spoken in boardrooms, courtrooms, rooms full of power and pressure. None of that prepared him for this. "Can I ask you something?" he said. The girl tilted her head. "Okay." He gestured lightly, not stepping closer than necessary. "Why do you smile at everyone?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Her eyes dropped to her shoes, clean though worn. She scuffed the toe gently against the ground, thinking. Then she looked back up. Maybe today is hard for them too. The words were simple, almost casual. They hit Mason like a held breath released all at once. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The girl seemed to sense his silence and offered a smaller smile as if to reassure him, as if he were the one who needed comfort. "Oh," she added softly, "you don't have to smile back." Something shifted in Mason's chest. In that moment, he understood this wasn't a smile born of happiness, but of care. A quiet choice made again and again by someone far too young to be carrying it alone. And for the first time in a very long while, Mason Rourke didn't walk away. Mason didn't reach for his wallet the way people usually did. He didn't hand her cash. He didn't ask questions that would corner her into answers she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he nodded once. "I'm going to grab something warm. Is it okay if I bring one back?" The girl hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, sir." Mason walked into the cafe, ordered a small soup, a roll of bread, and a cup of warm milk. He asked Rena to pack it carefully. When he returned, he placed the bag on the bench, not in the girl's hands, but beside her, leaving her the choice to reach for it. "I'll sit over there," he said, taking a step back. "You let me know if this is okay." She opened the bag slowly, as if the warmth inside might disappear if she moved too fast. Steam curled up into the cold air. She took a careful sip, eyes closing for half a second. "It's warm," she said, surprised. Mason nodded. "Good." He stayed quiet. No hovering, no staring. He let the city speak around them, the hum of traffic, the distant siren that never came close, the soft rhythm of people passing by. After a moment, the girl broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Mason replied. "But I also want to do things the right way." She looked at him puzzled. What's the right way? Mason considered the question. The way that doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. The way that keeps you safe. She seemed to think about that. Then she nodded, satisfied for now. When she finished eating, she folded the paper, neatly tucking it back into the bag. "Thank you for sitting over there," she said. "Some people get too close." Mason felt a quiet ache in his chest. "I'll remember that," he said. And he meant it. They didn't talk much after that, but the silence felt different, less empty. Mason noticed how the girl kept her backpack close, not clutched in fear, but arranged with care. When she stood, she straightened the bench before sitting again. When someone passed too near, she shifted just enough to give them space. "You're very polite," Mason said gently. She shrugged. "It helps." "Helps with what? With not bothering people?" The words were said so simply that Mason almost missed the weight behind them. He watched her for a moment. "Do you make rules for yourself?" She nodded. "Yes, sir." "Like what?" She counted on her fingers. "Don't ask questions, don't take too long. Don't be loud. Always say thank you." Mason listened, each rule stacking quietly on his heart, and smiling, he asked. She smiled as if he'd answered his own question. "That's the most important one." Why she looked down. People don't worry as much when you smile. Mason thought of boardrooms full of anxious adults, of meetings where smiles were tools. Hearing it from a child felt wrong, unfair. "You know," he said carefully, "you don't owe anyone comfort." She looked up, startled. "I don't know," Mason said. "You don't." She didn't argue. She just seemed confused, as if the idea had never been offered to her before. A bus pulled up, doors hissing open. The girl stayed seated. "You waiting for someone?" Mason asked. She shook her head. "No, sir. I just sit here." The bus pulled away, leaving a pocket of quiet behind. Mason glanced at his watch, then back at her. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said. "If that's okay." She nodded again. "Okay." As Mason walked away, he realized the rules she lived by weren't signs of obedience. They were signs of survival. The next morning, Mason didn't go straight to the office. He called Avery Cho instead. "I need guidance," he said. "There's a child near the building. She's safe right now, but she shouldn't be alone." Avery didn't interrupt. She listened. When Mason finished, there was a pause. "If you get involved," she said carefully, "you do it transparently. No shortcuts, no favors." "That's what I want," Mason replied. "I don't want to scare her. I don't want to disappear either." "Then we coordinate," Avery said. "Community outreach, local officer, child services properly." Mason exhaled. "Okay." That evening he returned to the bus stop. The girl was there again, just as composed, just as small. She smiled when she saw him, but this time the smile seemed thinner. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," Mason replied. He crouched slightly, keeping distance. "I want to make sure you're okay. That means I might ask for help from people whose job is to keep kids safe." Her smile faltered just a little. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Mason said quickly. "Not at all. This isn't about trouble. It's about care." She studied his face, searching for something. Finally, she nodded. "Okay." Mason felt the weight of the moment settle in. This was no longer a quiet kindness. It was a responsibility. He stood straightening his coat. "I'll stay nearby," he said, "and I'll explain everything before anything happens." She looked relieved, not happy, but less afraid. As Mason stepped back, he understood something important. The hardest part wasn't deciding to help. It was choosing to stay even when help required patience rules and the courage to do things slowly, the right way. The evening air felt sharper than usual. Mason arrived earlier than before, not because he was anxious, but because he had learned that timing mattered. When he saw Lark at the bus stop, he felt a quiet relief. She was sitting straight, backpack beside her, hands folded in her lap. She smiled when she noticed him. "You're early," she said. "So are you," Mason replied gently. Before either of them could say more, footsteps approached from behind. Calm, unhurried. Officer Elias Grant stopped a respectful distance away. His hands were visible, his voice steady. "Evening. I'm Officer Grant, just checking in." Lark's smile stayed, but it didn't reach her eyes this time. Mason stepped forward immediately. "I asked for help," he said clearly. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Officer Grant nodded. "I know. This is just about making sure everyone's safe." Lark looked between them. "Am I okay?" "You're," the officer said, crouching slightly but not too close. "You're doing great." Mason watched carefully. No raised voices, no pressure, just calm questions and patience. Officer Grant asked Lark if she knew her address, if there was an adult she trusted. She answered politely, carefully, never giving more than she felt safe giving. "I'm okay right here," she said. Mason noticed something then. She was still smiling, but it had become work. After a few minutes, Officer Grant stood. "I'll coordinate with community services. No rush, no surprises. Thank you," Mason said. As the officer walked away, Lark let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I thought uniforms meant I messed up," she admitted quietly. Mason shook his head. "Sometimes they just mean people are doing their jobs." She nodded, but her smile didn't come back right away, and that absence echoed louder than anything she had said. They sat in silence after the officer left. The city continued as if nothing had happened, cars passing, a bus stopping, voices floating by. But something fragile had shifted between them. "You didn't have to call him," Lark said eventually. Her tone wasn't angry, just careful. "I know," Mason replied, "but I didn't want anyone to think I was hiding anything, or that you were alone." She traced the edge of the bench with her finger. Sometimes being noticed makes things bigger. Mason understood that feeling too well. "You did everything right," he said. "You answered honestly. You stayed calm. She nodded. That's one of my rules. Mason looked at her. You shouldn't need rules like that. She smiled again, quick, automatic. It's okay, I'm good at them. That was when Mason saw it clearly. The smile wasn't joy. It was effort. A man passed by and glanced at them. Lark smiled at him immediately. The man smiled back, relieved, and kept walking. Mason felt something twist inside him. Do you ever get tired? He asked softly. She didn't answer at first. Then she shrugged. Smiling doesn't take much. Mason wanted to say that it did, that it took more strength than most adults ever used. Instead, he said, You don't have to do it all the time. Not with me. She looked up, searching his face. You won't think I'm rude. No, Mason said. I'll think you're human. For a second, her expression wavered, caught between relief and uncertainty. The bus arrived. Doors opened. Lark stayed seated. I'll see you tomorrow, Mason said, making sure it was a promise he could keep. She nodded. Okay. As Mason walked away, he glanced back. Lark was smiling again, but now he knew how heavy that smile was, and it scared him. The next evening, Mason brought no food, no plans, just time. Lark noticed immediately. No soup today, Mason smiled faintly. I thought we'd just talk. She seemed relieved by that. What's your name? Mason asked. She paused. Then carefully, as if handing over something fragile, Lark. Lark, Mason repeated. That's a beautiful name. She hesitated. Win. Lark Win. He nodded, committing it to memory like a promise. Do you go to school, Lark? He asked, not prying, just opening a door. Sometimes, she said. When it works. What happens when it doesn't? She thought for a moment. I wait. The word sat between them, heavy and unfinished. Mason leaned back, keeping his voice light. Waiting can be hard. She smiled. I'm good at that too. There it was again, the smile quick and practiced. Do you ever get to be bad at things? Mason asked. She frowned, genuinely confused. Why would I want that? Mason didn't answer. He watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. Lark, he said, if someone wanted to help you properly, how would that make you feel? Her smile faded just a little. Help means questions. Yes, Mason said honestly, and sometimes forms. She considered that. Do forms make people go away? Only if they're done wrong, Mason replied. If they're done right, they're supposed to help people stay. She looked down at her backpack. I have a plan, she said quietly. Mason's heart sank, 8 years old and already planning for survival. I don't want to ruin your plan, he said. I just want to make sure it doesn't have to be so hard. Lark looked up at him then. Really looked, and for the first time since he'd met her, she didn't smile at all. The misunderstanding didn't come with raised voices or sudden movement. It arrived quietly, wrapped in good intentions. Mason was speaking with Officer Grant near the edge of the plaza when he noticed Lark standing a few steps away. She wasn't eavesdropping. She was simply there, hands folded, eyes lowered. I'll make sure services follow protocol, the officer said. Slow and clear. Mason nodded. Thank you. She deserves that. Lark caught the word services. Her shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. When Officer Grant left, Mason turned back toward her. Everything's okay, he said gently. Nothing's changing tonight. She smiled on instinct. Okay. But something about that smile felt wrong. You don't have to pretend with me, Mason added. I'm not pretending, she said quickly. Too quickly. I'm fine. They sat in silence. A bus pulled indoors, opening with a hiss. Lark stood without realizing she was doing it. You're leaving, Mason asked. No, she said. I just move when buses come. It's easier. Easier for who? For everyone, she replied. Mason waited, letting the space stay open. Finally, she spoke again, softly, carefully. When people talk about services, she said, they mean places where you stay until someone decides what to do with you. Mason felt his chest tighten. That's not what this is. She nodded, smiling again. I know. But her fingers twisted the strap of her backpack. Once. Twice. You didn't tell me they might ask questions, she said. I didn't want to scare you, Mason replied. I wanted to protect you. Her smile flickered. Sometimes those feel the same. The bus pulled away. Lark sat back down, smaller somehow. I'll still be here tomorrow, Mason said. Nothing happens without you knowing. She looked at him, then really looked. People say that, she said. They usually mean it when they say it. The smile returned, but thinner than ever. And Mason realized the misunderstanding wasn't about what he'd done. It was about what she'd already learned to expect. Mason arrived early. The bench was empty. For one sharp second, fear surged, but then he saw her sitting a little farther down, half hidden by shadow. Her backpack was beside her, but she wasn't arranging it. She wasn't watching people pass, and she wasn't smiling. Mason approached, slowly stopping a respectful distance away. Hey. She looked up. Her face was calm, not sad, just tired. You came, she said. I said I would. She nodded. I believed you. That should have eased him. Instead, it made everything heavier. They sat without speaking. The city moved around them, indifferent and loud. Lark stared at the pavement, tracing a crack with the toe of her shoe. Are you okay? Mason asked. She took a long breath. I think so. But she hesitated. I don't feel like smiling today. The words were small. They landed like thunder. You don't have to, Mason said immediately. I know, she swallowed. I just don't want anyone to think I'm ungrateful for what Mason asked, for caring. The ache in his chest spread. I smiled so others wouldn't feel sad, Lark said quietly. But I'm tired today. Mason felt his throat tighten. He turned slightly, giving her space, grounding himself so his voice wouldn't shake. You're allowed to be tired, he said. You're allowed to rest. She didn't answer. She just sat there, hands in her lap, breathing carefully, as if resting was a skill she'd never practiced. A woman passed and glanced at Lark, expecting a smile. When it didn't come, the woman looked away, uncomfortable. Lark noticed. Her lips twitched, ready to rise. Mason shook his head just a little. You don't owe anyone that. Her hands stilled. I don't, she asked. No, Mason said. Not today, not ever. She leaned back against the bench for the first time since he'd known her. Her shoulders dropped just an inch. The city noise softened. For several minutes, nothing happened. And somehow that nothing felt like the bravest thing Lark had ever done. The air grew colder as evening settled in. Mason wrapped his scarf around his own neck, then paused. He didn't offer it to Lark, not without asking. He remembered her need for choice. Would you like this? He asked, holding it out but not moving closer. She looked at it then, at him. You'll be cold. I'll be okay. She considered, then nodded. He placed the scarf gently on the bench beside her. She picked it up herself and wrapped it carefully as if it were something valuable. Thank you, she said. They sat like that for a while, two people sharing warmth without touching. Lark Mason said at last, there are ways to make sure you're safe without surprises. Places where you can rest, with people whose job is to protect kids. Her shoulders tensed, but she didn't pull away. You mean, officially, she said. Yes, Mason replied, and I'd stay involved. I wouldn't disappear. She stared straight ahead. If I stop smiling, she asked, will you leave too? The question was barely louder than the wind. Mason stood slowly, then knelt so they were eye level, still keeping space, still careful. No, he said, steady and certain. You don't have to smile for me. You don't have to be strong here. Her breath hitched, not a sob, not a cry. Just release. You can rest now, Mason continued. I'll handle the grown-up parts, together with the right people. Lark's eyes filled, but nothing spilled over. She nodded once. For the first time since he'd met her, she leaned back fully against the bench scarf, pulled close eyes half-lidded. She didn't smile. And Mason knew this was the moment everything truly changed. The community center didn't look special from the outside. Just brick walls, wide windows, and a door that opened slowly instead of swinging wide. Inside, the light was soft, not bright enough to interrogate, not dim enough to feel hidden. Lark stood just inside the entrance, her backpack still on her shoulders. "You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to," Mason said, keeping his voice low. "This is just a place to sit for a bit." She nodded but didn't move. A woman approached them, her posture calm, her smile small and unforced. "Hi, Lark. I'm Ms. Mercer. You can call me Dahlia." Lark blinked. "Just Dahlia." "Yes," the woman said. "I don't like titles when I'm meeting someone new." That seemed to help. Lark slipped one strap of her backpack off her shoulder. They were shown into a room with a couch, a low table, and a shelf of books with worn spines. A mug of warm cocoa waited, steam curling lazily. "No rush," Dahlia said. "You can sit wherever feels best." Lark chose the floor, cross-legged, close enough to the couch to lean against it if she wanted. Mason sat in a chair nearby, not too close, not too far. Minutes passed without questions. Lark sipped the cocoa, eyes scanning the room as if memorizing exits. When nothing happened, she relaxed a fraction. "This place doesn't smell scary," she said. Mason smiled, surprised. "That's good feedback." Dahlia knelt briefly to Lark's level. "No one here expects anything from you tonight. You don't need to explain anything." Lark looked at Mason. "Not even smiling, especially not smiling," he replied. Something in her shoulders loosened. For the first time, she set her backpack down beside her instead of holding it. Outside, the city kept rushing. Inside, time slowed. And Lark, who had learned to be careful everywhere, found herself in a place that didn't ask her to perform safety for others. Mason had signed contracts worth more than entire neighborhoods. None of them felt as heavy as the papers now resting on the table between him and Dahlia Mercer. "These are not permanent," Dahlia said evenly. "They're steps, temporary placement, oversight, regular check-ins." Mason nodded. "I understand." "You'll need to prove consistency," she continued. "Time, presence, cooperation. I can do that." Dahlia studied him, not skeptically, but carefully. "This isn't about resources, Mr. Rourke. It's about reliability," "I know," Mason said. "That's why I'm here." Across the room, Lark sat with a volunteer, quietly turning pages of a picture book. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't frowning either. She was just being. "That's a good sign," Dahlia said softly, following Mason's gaze. "Children who feel safe stop performing." Mason swallowed. "What happens if something's missing?" he asked. "A form, a record." "Then we slow down," Dahlia replied. "We don't punish gaps. We understand them." The words were firm, reassuring, and terrifying. Slowing down meant waiting. Waiting meant uncertainty. Lark glanced up, sensing the shift in Mason's posture. She didn't smile. She just watched. Mason excused himself and knelt beside her. "They need to check some things," he said honestly. "That takes time." "Does time make people change their minds?" she asked. "Sometimes," Mason said. "But it also helps people do things right." She considered that. "Will you still come?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Even if I don't smile," Mason met her eyes. "Especially then." She nodded, accepting the answer, not with joy, but with trust. When they left later that night, Lark walked out without looking back. She didn't need to. The guest room had been prepared carefully. Not extravagant. Just clean sheets, a nightlight shaped like a moon, a stack of books Mason remembered loving as a child. Everything was approved. Everything documented. Lark stood in the doorway. "It's quiet," she said. "Too quiet?" Mason asked. She shook her head. "Just different." He showed her where the bathroom was, where the water got warm, where the phone sat with emergency numbers taped beside it. He explained the rules not as restrictions, but as assurances. "You're in charge of telling us how you feel," he said, "and Dahlia will check in." Lark listened closely. "What if I mess up?" she asked. "You won't," Mason said. "But even if you do, we fix things. Grown-ups do the fixing." She nodded, filing the information away. Later, as she sat on the bed, she touched the blanket like it might vanish. "People don't usually keep doing nice things," she said quietly. Mason sat in the chair by the door. "I know. Is this because you're rich?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "No. This is because you're you." That seemed to confuse her more than anything else. When the lights dimmed, Lark lay down stiff at first, then slowly easing into the mattress. Mason didn't linger. He stood ready to leave her space. "Mr. Mason," she asked. "Yes, if they decide something different. Will you be mad at me?" The question cut deeper than any accusation. Mason stepped back to the doorway. "No," he said firmly. "If that happens, it won't be because of you, and I'll still be here." She nodded, eyes closing. As Mason turned out the light, he felt a new fear settle in, not of losing control, but of losing her by doing everything correctly. For the first time, he understood that kindness wasn't the hard part. Patience was. Morning came softly in Mason Rourke's home. No alarms blaring, no doors slamming, no urgency demanding a performance. Lark woke before the sun had fully warmed the windows. She sat upright in bed, listening. The quiet was so complete it almost felt like a test. When nothing happened, she slid off the mattress and padded to the bathroom, closing the door gently the way she always did. She washed her hands longer than necessary, then stared at her reflection like she was checking if she still looked like herself. In the kitchen, Mason was already up. Not because he needed to be, because he wanted to be reliable. "Good morning," he said, voice calm, keeping the distance respectful. Lark nodded. She didn't smile. Not because she couldn't, because she was still learning she didn't have to. Mason placed a bowl of oatmeal on the counter and stepped back. "You can sit wherever you like." Lark chose the far end of the table. Not out of fear, out of habit. She took one spoonful, then another. A few minutes passed. "Is the oatmeal okay?" Mason asked. "It's good," she said quickly. "Thank you." He watched her gently, noticing the way her shoulders tensed each time she swallowed, as if she expected the comfort to be temporary. A knock sounded at the door. Lark froze. Mason held up one hand, steady. "It's Dahlia," he said. "She's coming for a check-in." Remember, Lark's eyes flicked to the phone with the emergency numbers taped beside it. Then back to Mason. "Okay," she whispered. Dahlia Mercer entered with a folder tucked under her arm. No clipboard in front of her face. No clinical distance. She simply took off her coat and sat on the couch, like this was a normal Tuesday. "Hi, Lark," she said warmly. "How's the moon nightlight?" Lark blinked, startled by the specific question. "It's nice." Dahlia nodded, pleased. "Good. Now today is not an interrogation. It's just a check-in. You can tell me as much or as little as you want." Lark stared at her bowl. Mason stayed near the doorway, present but not looming. Dahlia spoke gently. "How do you feel being here?" Lark's fingers tightened around her spoon. "Fine." Dahlia didn't push. "What's the best part so far?" Silence. Then Lark said something so small it almost disappeared. "The chair doesn't wobble." Mason's chest tightened. He didn't comment. He didn't turn it into a speech. He let it be what it was, a detail that carried the weight of a life lived on unstable surfaces. Dahlia smiled softly. "That matters." Lark nodded, eyes still down. "Am I doing it right?" Dahlia tilted her head. "Doing what right, being here," Lark said. "Not messing up." Mason stepped forward, careful. "Lark, you don't have to earn being safe." Her lips pressed together. She didn't smile. She didn't argue, she just looked uncertain. Dahlia opened her folder slowly, showing only a page with simple headings. "There will be a hearing," she said. "A short one. It's part of making sure everything is done legally and responsibly. No one is trying to take you away. This is about making sure you have the right care." Lark's face went still. "A hearing," she repeated. "Like a court," Dahlia nodded. "A small one. And Mason will be there. Avery will be there. I'll be there. You won't be alone." Lark's eyes flicked to Mason, then away. Mason knelt by the chair, still at a respectful distance. "We'll explain everything before anything happens," he said. "No surprises." Lark's voice came out quiet and sharp at the same time. "People say that." Mason didn't flinch. "I know." Dahlia watched them both, then spoke gently. "Lark, do you have questions?" Lark swallowed. Her fingers kept turning the spoon in circles like she was stirring courage into existence. Then the question came soft, almost embarrassed. "If I stop smiling," she asked, "will you still want me here?" The room went very still. Mason felt the air leave his lungs like he'd been hit without being touched. Not because the question was dramatic, because it was honest. He didn't rush to answer. He wanted her to believe him for real, not just hear pretty words. He stood slowly, then crouched, so he was closer to her level without crowding her space. "Lark," he said, voice steady. "I don't want you here because you smile. I want you here because you are a person who deserves safety." Her eyes glistened. Not tears, not breakdown. Just the shine of something thawing. "And if you never smiled again," Mason continued, "I would still show up, every day, even if it's hard. Especially if it's hard." Lark looked at him for a long time. The spoon stopped turning. Finally, she whispered, almost like she was practicing a new language. "Okay." Dahlia exhaled quietly, satisfied not because the moment was perfect, but because it was real. And for the first time, Lark didn't smile to protect anyone else. She simply breathed as if the world had made space for her. 2 days later, Mason found himself staring at a calendar like it was a countdown. Not to a product launch, not to a merger, not to a board vote, to a hearing. A simple appointment that meant everything. Avery Cho arrived with a legal pad and that calm, sharp focus that made people feel both safe and slightly terrified. "It's not a battle," she reminded him. "It's a review. The court's job is to make sure Lark is protected and that your home is appropriate." Mason nodded. "I know." Still, Avery said they'll ask questions. They'll look for stability, consistency, and they'll be careful about power dynamics. "I want them to be," Mason replied immediately. "I want this done correctly." Avery's expression softened for half a second. "Good. Then we're aligned." Later, Dahlia came by for another check-in routine, scheduled, transparent. She walked through the guest room, checked the safety basics, noted the emergency numbers taped by the phone, the child-appropriate books, the nightlight, the clear boundaries. Mason didn't try to impress her. He didn't offer a tour like a salesman. He simply answered questions calmly. Meanwhile, Lark sat at the kitchen table with a set of colored pencils. Mason had bought nothing fancy, just a small box with a bright label. "You can draw anything," he told her. "No one's grading it." Lark drew carefully, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. She didn't smile while she worked. She was too busy being present. When she finished, she slid the paper across the table toward him. It was a picture of a streetlight. Not a person. Not a house. A streetlight glowing over a small bench. Mason's throat tightened. "This is beautiful." Lark shrugged, pretending it didn't matter. "It's the light that's always on." Mason looked up. "The one outside the building." She nodded. "That light helped you feel safe?" Lark hesitated. "It helped me feel not invisible." The words landed with quiet force. Dahlia, standing near the doorway, heard it. She didn't comment right away. She only said gently, "That makes sense." After Dahlia left, Avery sat with Mason on the couch. "Here's what you should expect," she said. "They'll ask why you're doing this. They'll ask what your plan is. They'll ask what support you have. And they'll want to know Lark's needs are being respected." Mason exhaled slowly. "What if I say the wrong thing?" Avery met his eyes. "Then you correct it. The goal isn't perfection, it's honesty." That night, Lark asked a question that startled Mason with its directness. "Is court where people decide if they want you?" she asked. Mason paused. "Court is where adults make sure kids are safe." She seemed to think about that. "Do they decide if you keep me?" Mason set down his glass of water. He didn't want to give promises that the legal process couldn't guarantee, but he also didn't want to leave her alone in uncertainty. "They decide what's safest," he said carefully. "But I'm going to tell them the truth." "What truth?" "That I want to take care of you," Mason said, "and that I'll follow every rule to do it right." Lark nodded, absorbing the words, like they were steps in a staircase. "What if they say no?" she asked quietly. Mason felt his heart squeeze. He kept his voice gentle. "Then we ask what needs to change, and we do it. We don't give up." Lark stared at her hands. "People usually give up," she said, almost matter of fact. Mason leaned forward slightly. "I'm not people," he said. Then he softened it. "I'm Mason." She looked up at him, studying his face. "Mason," she repeated, testing the sound. He nodded. That single syllable felt like a bridge being built slowly, carefully, with permission. When Lark went to bed, Mason sat alone in the living room, lights low, calendar open. He stared at the hearing date again. The fear wasn't that the court would misunderstand him. The fear was that Lark had been misunderstood for so long, she no longer expected to be chosen. And Mason knew something with painful clarity. He wasn't fighting a system. He was fighting time, trying to arrive in a child's life before hope learned to shut its door. The days leading up to the hearing weren't filled with dramatic confrontations. They were filled with something harder: consistency. Mason woke early. He made breakfast. He asked Lark what she preferred without insisting she decide quickly. He walked her to the community center where Dahlia had arranged a child-friendly program during the day. Lark didn't cling to him. She didn't panic. She simply watched everything like she was learning the rules of a new planet. At the center, Rena appeared one afternoon with a small paper bag. "I brought you something," she told Lark, placing it on the table. "Not a big deal." Lark looked inside and found a tiny notebook with a bright cover. "For drawings?" Lark asked. "For anything," Rena said. "Thoughts, lists, secrets you don't want to say out loud. Your pages, your choice." Lark held it carefully, like it might be too kind to be real. "Thank you," she whispered. Officer Grant stopped by once off duty, just to say hello and confirm everything was going smoothly. He didn't question Lark. He didn't lecture. He simply treated her like a person. "Hey, Lark," he said warmly. "You doing okay?" Lark nodded. Then surprisingly, she asked, "Do you have to be serious all the time because you're an officer?" Officer Grant laughed softly. "Nope, I just like being helpful." Lark seemed to file that away. Later that evening, Mason found Lark at the kitchen table writing in the notebook. When she noticed him, she closed it quickly. Mason lifted both hands, slightly playful surrender. "Private. Got it." She relaxed just a little. Avery arrived with a folder and a small list of questions. Not to rehearse answers like a performance, but to prepare Mason to speak clearly. "What do you want the court to understand?" Avery asked. Mason didn't hesitate. That she shouldn't have to be brave all the time. Avery's eyes softened. "Good. Say that." The next day, Dahlia scheduled a brief meeting with Mason and Lark together, something she called a clarity talk. "We're going to talk about what court looks like," she said, kneeling so her voice stayed gentle. "It's a room. There will be adults. Some will ask questions. You can answer if you want. You can also say, I don't know, or I'm not ready. That is allowed. Lark stared at the floor. Is it bad if I don't smile? Dahlia shook her head. No, court isn't a place to perform. It's a place for adults to do their job. Lark looked up. What if they don't like me? Mason's chest tightened, but he kept his voice calm. They're not there to like you, he said. They're there to protect you. And I like you enough for an entire room. Lark blinked, startled by the warmth. That's a lot. It is, Mason said gently. And you don't have to earn it. That night, Lark stood near the window watching the streetlights come on. Mason stood a few steps behind her, not intruding. Do you miss the bench? He asked softly. Lark nodded slowly. It was mine. Mason's heart ached at the simplicity of it. What if we visit it, he said after court, just to say goodbye properly. Not because you have to, because you can. Lark turned, uncertainty flickering across her face. People don't say goodbye to benches, she murmured. Mason smiled faintly. Maybe they should. For a moment, Lark almost smiled, almost. Then she stopped herself like she remembered she didn't have to. Instead, she did something smaller and more powerful. She leaned her shoulder lightly against the wall, letting herself be supported. And Mason understood the city was beginning to show up for her Rena Grant, Dahlia Avery. But the real miracle wasn't a network of adults. It was a child inch by inch learning that safety could be something she didn't have to invent alone. The courtroom was smaller than Mason expected. No echoing drama, no raised voices, just wood-paneled walls, soft lighting, and a long table where adults sat with papers neatly stacked in front of them. Lark sat beside Dahlia Mercer's feet, not quite touching the floor. Her hands were folded in her lap. She wasn't smiling, and for the first time that felt right. Mason sat a few seats away, Avery beside him. He didn't look at Lark too often, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't want her to feel watched. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. The questions began. Simple ones. Responsible ones. About routines. About safety. About stability. Mason answered clearly. No speeches, no theatrics. Then came the question he had been expecting and dreading. Mr. Rourke, the judge said, why do you want to take responsibility for this child? The room went still. Mason took a breath. He didn't look at Lark yet, because he said slowly she learned to care about everyone before anyone cared about her. He paused, then continued, voice steady. She smiles so others don't feel alone. But she shouldn't have to do that to survive. She deserves a place where she doesn't need to be brave. The judge listened. No reaction. Just attention. Dahlia spoke next about procedures, about safeguards, about oversight. Then the judge turned gently toward Lark. You don't have to answer, she said. But if you want to, how do you feel being with Mr. Rourke? Lark's fingers tightened. She didn't smile. I feel quiet, she said after a moment. In a good way. The judge nodded once. After a short pause, the ruling came. Temporary guardianship approved, continued oversight, clear conditions, protection first. Mason exhaled, slow, controlled. Lark didn't react right away. She simply sat there, absorbing the words. Dahlia leaned close and whispered, that means you're safe. Lark nodded, not smiling, but safe. That evening, the apartment felt different. Not triumphant, not celebratory, just settled. Mason cooked dinner quietly. Nothing fancy: pasta, warm bread, vegetables arranged carefully on a plate. He set the table and stepped back, letting Lark choose her seat. She chose the same one as the night before. You did really well today, Mason said. I didn't say much, Lark replied. That counts. She considered that. After dinner, Lark wandered toward the window. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one. The bench is still there, she said. Yes, Mason replied. It will be. She turned toward him uncertain. Do I have to forget it now? No, Mason said immediately. You don't have to forget anything. She seemed relieved. Later, as she prepared for bed, Lark paused at the doorway. Mr. Mason. You can call me Mason, he said gently. Mason, she corrected. Today. Was I good enough? The question landed softly and cut deeply. Mason knelt, keeping space, meeting her eyes. You were never being tested, he said. Not today. Not ever. She searched his face, making sure. Okay, she said. That night, Lark slept longer than she ever had. No sudden waking, no checking the door. Mason sat in the living room with the lights low, listening to the quiet. Nothing had been taken away from her that day. No smile, no strength, no dignity. Only the weight of uncertainty. And that felt like a victory. Morning sunlight filled the kitchen. Lark sat at the table eating breakfast slowly. She wasn't watching Mason to see if he approved. She wasn't scanning the room for rules. She was just eating. Mason poured coffee and leaned against the counter, careful not to disturb the moment. When she finished, Lark looked up. She smiled. Not quickly, not automatically. It arrived naturally, soft, unguarded. Mason froze. He understood instantly. This smile wasn't armor. It wasn't a gift offered to protect others. It was joy. Real, quiet joy. Later that day, Mason walked Lark past the old bus stop. The bench sat under the same streetlight. Familiar. Ordinary. Lark stopped. She didn't sit down. She didn't smile at passers-by. She simply stood there for a moment. Thank you. She whispered to the bench, to the light, to the version of herself that had survived there. Then she turned and took Mason's hand briefly, lightly, before letting go. At home, she placed her backpack in the closet. Not hidden, not clutched, just stored. That evening, Mason watched her read on the couch, feet tucked beneath her body, relaxed. She looked up and caught him watching. Why are you smiling? She asked. Mason smiled back. Maybe today is easy for us. She laughed, a small sound, surprised by itself, and in that moment the world felt whole. She didn't smile to survive anymore. She smiled because she finally could. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.